Welcome to the Photography Opinion Podcast. We discuss all things photo, video, and camera related. I'm Ben Lucas.
And I'm Stuart Marlantis.
And this is Photo Op. Hello, podcast listeners. Today, we have a kind of special banter for you. So, just a couple days ago, Stuart and I did a very fun shoot, and today we are going to talk about that shoot.
Today, we are going to shill for Laowa, even though we are not sponsored.
Hashtag not sponsored. So if you are listening to this in just the podcast audio form, you are about to hear a musical interlude. Otherwise, if you are watching this on YouTube, then this is the clip we are going to be talking about this episode.
To explain what's going on for those of you that are listening only, although really you should watch the video to get some more context for this. What we did was we did a shoot with some miniatures and the Laowa Probe Lens, which if you're not familiar is a lens that looks almost like a gun barrel. It's this really long, skinny lens that's built to, it's a macro lens. It's basically built so that you can put it in places and give yourself a perspective of being like a tiny little person looking
at a bug's eye
yeah,
perspective.
It really is a bug's eye perspective. So if Disney were to do a live action Bug's Life, like they're doing live action of every other movie, they would probably shoot it on the Laowa Probe Lens. And no, The Lion King is not live action, it is CG. I mean real live action.
So the Laowa Probe Lens is a 24mm wide-angle macro. Now, the thing that we're talking about that really makes this lens special, again, not sponsored, this is just a kind of weird, crazy thing, and we like talking about it. Mm-hmm. So the thing that makes this special is the minimum focus distance for this lens is literally the tip of the barrel. It is 0 inches. And so that means that you can basically get wide angle photos that you can't get otherwise. I think there's like a 60mm macro made by Canon or something, but the one that most people use is a 100mm macro. Okay. Macro is just a very telephoto, telescopic thing. And for when we're talking about lens compression, when you zoom in at 100mm, you see nothing. There's no environment. You have complete isolation of your subject. And at that focal length, your depth of field is just razor thin. Now, with the Laowa Probe Lens, you're even at f14, which is the widest the aperture goes, you're still razor thin.
Yeah, that's true. But you get that wide angle perspective, so you see environment, you see context, and that is the thing that makes, basically it looks like CGI, but it's not. Yeah, it really does. And when you we would encourage you, beyond looking at the video that we shot, to look at other Laowa Probe Lens videos. The downside to looking those up is you will now be able to identify every shot made with a Laowa Probe Lens forever, and it's very common, or increasingly common, especially with product photography. Everything is like, oh wait, that's a Laowa Probe Lens. Oh, that's a Laowa Probe Lens.
Stuart and I have a running chat thread where we just send each other links and go, Probe Lens!
Yep, exactly. So you too will have that superpower.
Yeah. But besides gaining the superpower of being able to identify this incredibly niche and kind of expensive lens, let's talk about this shot. So one of the things that I get asked a lot is when you're doing like a portrait shoot with somebody, right? How many photos per hour do you get?
Well, we're going to reverse that on you. And how many hours per photo? That's kind of what we're talking about today. So we are going to break down kind of our thinking about it and then our physical onset stuff and how we came up with what I think is a pretty cool shot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so what was the original... I guess the original concept is we just wanted to... We talk about this all the time. Like, once you got a probe lens, it was a discussion of what things can we shoot with the probe lens. Yeah. And that list is essentially unending, and we're always finding new stuff to shoot with it. But we did talk about minis. We're both, to some degree, invested in the board game and miniature scene.
Nerd!
Yeah,
nerd. And see you later today for D&D, by the way.
Yeah. That's not a
joke. So specifically, I am working on doing a video reel. Mm-hmm. So we are going to put out a reel being like, hey, here are our capabilities and kind of the cool stuff we can do. You should hire us for video. Mm-hmm. So this particular clip does have a specific purpose. I am trying to, one, show off a cool, interesting, impactful visual thing, but I'm also trying to transition from a client clip to a second client clip, and the two have absolutely nothing to do with each other. So one is like tabletop product stuff, and the other one is a shot of Deadpool talking. So this is kind of what when we're trying to imagine what kind of transitions these two clips. I was thinking minis, because minis kind of go more into the nerdscape that transition into the Deadpool, but it also transitions well out of kind of the product photography stuff. So this was kind of okay, we need 8 seconds worth of footage to transition these two clips. Go. And we came up with the probe lens, and so that's kind of the why we did it. Mm-hmm. One thing that I'll just kind of jump in, when I see a lot of TFP, time for prints, or this applies to video as well. When people say, hey, I have a cool idea, and then they do a cool thing, you can do a cool thing. There's nothing against that. But who's going to pay you for that thing? Mm-hmm. So if you're doing it as a portfolio piece, then it should be like, oh, some company or like tabletop or gaming or someone would be like, that's amazing. I want you to do a bunch of product photography like that. So I see a lot of people do like goth horror, glamour, boudoir type like portrait shoots. And I'm like, this has no audience. I don't get the audience. Mm-hmm. Versus when we are doing shots, our reel has a bunch of real client work in it. But it also has these clips that we have self-selected of this would be a cool clip we would like to make for clients, and we kind of have clients in mind when we're doing that. Mm-hmm. So when you're just shooting rando stuff for yourself, like play, have fun. If you get a lens, figure out what the lens can do, obviously. But if you're trying to make a shot and you're going to invest this much time and effort, think about why. Mm-hmm. Who cares that you're actually making this shot?
Yeah, one of the things that I took inspiration from working on this project was a promotion for Halo. I think it might have been Halo 2. Microsoft did this extremely cool commercial where they built a whole landscape scene from, ostensibly from the game, but it was all real miniatures, like real miniature work and a landscape and all this cool stuff going on. It had all these sound effects and it had a camera that kind of zoomed through the scene. Everything was static, but it hinted at actual motion going on. Really fantastic commercial. I would encourage you to look it up. I think it was Halo 2, but if you just search like Halo miniature commercial, it'll show up. And this is something that like the Laowa Probe Lens is like, that commercial was pretty cool, but boy, if they had the probe lens at that time, it would have taken it to an entirely new level. And that was some of the inspiration for this shoot for me personally, was bringing it, even taking that kind of concept, but bringing it down closer and being more present in the space.
I mean, the first thing involved in getting this shoot is obviously the logistics of getting everyone together, right? So my friend Daryl paints Warhammer Minis and volunteered to bring a huge stash of minis and terrain over, and then I, have a table. So Stuart and I started kind of pre-planning what we wanted to do, but of course, once we actually get on set, so much can change. So we can kind of break down the rest of this episode. So far, we've kind of done introduction and what I would call non-technical. I do feel like the non-technical parts of a photo shoot are really important, though. Why are you doing it? What is the purpose that you're doing it for? What are your inspirations for it? I feel like all of that is really important to a shoot. But now we are going to get into a lot more of the filmmaking technical parts. So we brought over all the minis, and so really the probe lens, it shines when you can do two things. When you can get razor close to a thing, that's number one. And when you can go through an object, that's number two. So if you think about putting your camera lens through like the holes in a chain link fence, and then when you pull through that chain link fence, you're like, whoa, the camera just went through the fence. We wanted to kind of create that. I knew I wanted to kind of go through a scene, not just over a scene, like you would have to do with a more traditional camera and lens setup. So as soon as I found that rock crag terrain that had that hole that we could pull through, I'm like, we have to build our set piece around this.
Yeah. So to give a little bit of context, there's this rock crag that's kind of the center that the probe lens starts actually kind of inserted into this hole in the crag, and then it pulls back. And that crag splits up basically 3 scenes in the clip. There's sort of a start scene, a middle scene, and an end scene. And that start and end are particularly impactful, intentionally so, with bigger, more detailed characters and kind of more action going on. And that was turns out kind of tricky to pull off. That movement, of course, we put it on a slider. We actually went through a couple different sliders to try to figure out which one was functional for it.
So let's actually start there. So we started just throwing stuff on a table, and then Daryl set up this beautiful scene, which if you were sitting down to actually play games, it looked great. But when we looked at it through the lens of the camera, we saw 2/3 of what he set down was out of the field of view. So it was useless. So we talked about doing more of a channel, because that's what the camera's actually going to see. Can you talk a little bit more about kind of our decision making that day of when we started with sliders? So we started with your slider because your slider is objectively better, but if you just want to kind of walk us through that.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, he built a great scene that looks awesome from a human's perspective, but from the slider's perspective, it looked a little far apart and/or was not seen at all. As we were setting up this channel, I set up my slider, which is it's a motorized slider, so you can set all sorts of speeds, and
it's app control and it's automated, and so it has a perfect it's belt driven, so it has a perfect pull every time.
There's one big downside to it though, and that is that it'll, at least with the probe lens mounted on it, it'll do about 18 inches of travel, which is huge for a lot of macro photography, but in this case we wanted to have quite a long pull with a lot of different things going on through it, and it just wasn't quite enough. We wanted really to have 3 distinct scenes, and we just couldn't quite fit it, especially going through the crag. We could only get so deep in the crag before the lens kind of bottomed out, and we just didn't have quite enough space to pull all the way back and reveal the final scene in the clip.
When we were pulling, so we started with, okay, let's have scene number 1, and then let's have a reveal going through this rock crag. Like, that was kind of the set piece. But what happened was Daryl started putting minis on all the different steps on the rock crag, and when your 18-inch slider stopped, we could barely even see them. And so we got like a scene and a half. We got this really cool intro and we got a really cool transition piece, but we were missing scene number 2. And I was thinking, well, my slider's only 2 feet. It's only 6 inches longer. But what can we do with that? So we really quickly just took the probe lens off your slider, put it on my slider, just to see what does that extra 6 inches of lift get us. And what we saw is not only do we have the whole rock crag, but we have another 4 inches that we can put minis in. And when you're talking minis, that's a lot of room to work with.
Yeah,
I realized we can get those different scenes.
He had 2 like super detailed minis that even at the beginning, before we kind of moved into this channel of stuff, he had these 2 minis that were just particularly spectacular. He wanted to have them like squaring off against each other in this fighting pose, and without those extra 6 inches, we
wouldn't have been able to
see them, and they were so key to the experience, so interesting and so cool. We didn't want to leave them out. So that 6 inches made all the difference. And that kind of makes sense. I mean, we're working in macro world, so although from our perspective, it's like, really, does that make much of a difference? When you're actually looking through the camera, you're like, wow, that's a huge extra addition of space to work.
It really
with.
did. Yeah. One of the other things that I've noticed with macro is I say this all the time with portraits, actually. When I get a couple next to each other and they look like they're supposed to love each other, I'm like, hey guys, you think you're close together, but the camera thinks there's a mile in between you. Like, get real close. Otherwise, it just looks like you're just 2 like strangers that I'm for some reason taking a couple's portrait of. It's kind of the same thing, but on a much bigger scale when you get down to minis. We were literally scraping on the rock crag, and we had maybe a millimeter's distance between like hitting some of his actual larger, big, detailed minis. And when we put them at kind of like, let's say, a 1/4 of an inch, like safe distance, the shot just didn't look impressive anymore.
Yeah,
like
they'd be right up against the probe.
They do. And I think what that really comes down to is for those of you listening at home, here's an experiment you can try. So get a 100 mil, your longest telephoto lens, okay? And hold it on one side of your desk and look through it, and then just drag it to the other side of your desk. If you're looking at a thing in the distance, pretty much nothing changed. You saw no difference. But throw on your widest angle and now do that 2-foot move from side to side, you get that parallax effect. And parallax is when the background is moving at a different speed than the foreground, where that wide angle really accentuates that by decompressing the scene. And so that kind of parallaxing multiple movement effect, it adds the wow factor. It adds that. And so by having minis really, really close to the barrel and a bunch of other stuff, it looks like it's just whooshing by, versus if it's slightly farther away from the barrel, it's just like, oh, hi, I'm here.
Yeah, you get a much better, I mean, not only is it more in your face, and you get a better idea of detail and really what's going on, but it gives, in addition to the physical movement, it kind of hyper accentuates the physical movement. It was only ultimately moving, a couple feet, but the extra density of things close to the barrel really kind of accelerated that movement, really exaggerated it, and made it look like we were moving much farther than we actually were.
Yeah.
Which is cool.
So we talked about kind of setting the scene. We talked about like our camera choices and our slider choices. And then when we were building the scene, just a weird thing with the probe lens, you kind of always want to pull back rather than push forward. If you do a push forward move, think about, is there a way that I can pull back and just reverse the footage in my editor? Because pushing forward is a lot more dangerous of hitting the lens against something or smacking into one of these minis that he spent days and days and hours painting.
Yeah.
There's so many things that could go wrong when we're projectiling into this scene. So I liked the idea of the pullback, and that was the original inspiration. But regardless, regardless, I think I would have wanted to make that move a pullback. And if we wanted it forward, then we would have just reversed it in the editor. So by putting the barrel in, you can build everything around the barrel without with knowing that you're gonna have clearance as you pull out.
Yeah, I mean, and that's literally how we did it. We extended the barrel as much as possible and then moved it back, and as we did, we built everything around it to make sure that clearances were perfect. So yeah, just physically put the barrel there if you're shooting with one of these lenses.
There was one weird clearance thing that we actually ran into near the end. We had the entire scene built out, but what was happening is as we were pulling through, the Laowa Probe Lens has LEDs built into the rim so that when you go into like an ant hole, you can light up the inside of that hole. Well, that is powered off a little USB hub kind of just on the side of the barrel. We actually hit a point where our clearances were so tight the USB hub was hitting stuff. So there's actually a point where we do have to slide, and as we're halfway through, we're sliding the minis in once we have clearance from that USB hub. So you're not seeing us pushing them in the shot, but we need to have clearance to pull out the thicker part of the barrel plus the USB hub. And then we get to the thin part of the barrel and we can push the minis kind of into the scene. So as they pull out, we get that grand reveal. If you don't know what we're talking about, again, Google the Laowa Probe Lens and look at the barrel shape, and then you will understand what we're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah. The other thing that we did while we were putting these scenes together is lighting. The scenes were actually built simultaneously with the lighting. It wasn't that we built the scene and we put the lighting in after. We really thought about how it was lit while we were doing it, and we experimented in real time as we were placing things on the table and putting these scenes together, just to see how things looked. And that really also influenced a lot of the placement of stuff. We relied on a lot of LED for this shoot, and a lot of RGB specifically.
So the finished shot used 9 lights.
9 lights.
So light number 1 is a floor light. We used an RGB panel that was colored red, aimed at the gray backdrop, so we can kind of get that red gradient sky look. Lights number 2 and 3, I have some barrel quasars, and so we kind of angled those in, and one of them straight, but the other one's at an angle, because you were actually seeing the tip of the barrel in the end of the slider shot. But so those kind of gave us a good side lighting for both sides and gave us this kind of dynamic lighting while kind of evenly showing the whole frame, versus if we were to use like a big softbox, we would have covered the whole scene in a soft swash of light, which is not what we were going for. We wanted kind of this hard, direct looking light.
Yeah, super dramatic. I mean, this is a battle scene. We're going for extra drama instead of softness.
And then you had and there were a couple more LEDs that were we used a couple of big ones just to add some ambient fill, and some small ones to spotlight several different characters. But you had the great idea to add in some of our lights that have effect options.
Yeah,
if you want to talk about that.
So as we were setting up, we have a couple LED lights that are that have effects available, and these can vary in quality, but one of the things that I really wanted to try was like fire or lightning kind of effects. Originally I started with the background, like trying to make it look like the sky is kind of shifting or that there's fire in the background, but what we ended up doing is I just kind of plopped one on the table in front of one of the figures with a fire effect that just is kind of this pulsing orange, and it gave this really cool, dramatic underlighting.
So cool. Yeah.
It looked really cool, and we had a couple of those little panels available, so basically we just started throwing those in places. We stood them up and tried to make it like light part of the crags. We did underlighting in the figures. We really experimented with placing those in the spots where they really looked best, and then kind of building on top of those. You've got this great LED cob light that has some effects, and for that one we put it on a
it was fireworks
firework,
mode.
yeah, because I think we tried lightning, but it was too harsh.
Lightning was too like strobe
too
light.
stroby.
Firework, you see the explosion, then it kind of fades out, and we were thinking if there's stuff exploding on the battlefield, that's the lighting effect you get.
Exactly. Like, we should make stuff exploding on the battlefield in light form. And so with that one, we put it a little bit farther away. We wanted this to be distant explosions, not like immediate, but we wanted that subtle kind of pulse of highlight lighting on all of the figures throughout the scene. And then you threw a gel on it to give it more, it's just a daylight balanced light. Well, I say just. There's nothing wrong with that, but you put a yellow gel on that to give it a little bit more context in the scene and balance it better with the rest of the lighting, the fires and explosions that are going on around. So although we didn't move any of the figures through the shot, I mean, we moved them into the shot, of course, but although when you see the figures, nothing is actually moving in the shot, we wanted to hint at movement, hint at action with the lighting.
And having some of those lighting effects really helped.
Yeah. So it was very creative, and you're kind of, I almost looked at it as more of a painting where you're painting in new action with the lighting, and it was very experimental and fun to put together, but it came together in this great, 9 lights. It's crazy for the amount of space we were working in, but it came together with this great lighting environment.
Yeah, the last thing I want to say about that final fireworks light is I was lighting the whole scene, so I pulled back so that the beam would cover all the minis in our scene, but I angled it in such a way that it could backlight into that crag, and as we were doing pulls, we kept doing pulls until we got one where so these effects are random. Like, they just kind of pulse, and it's not a constant pulse. It's a little bit random pulse, so you don't know when exactly it's going to go off. But we set it at a high frequency so that it would kind of reliably keep doing stuff. And we kept pulling until, as we were going through that rock crag, you got this perfect kind of beam of orange lighting that up, so you could see all of the texture and detail in what was just a weird black encroaching rectangle closing your frame off, and then all of a sudden you get this lightning type explosion light showing like, oh no, that's another surface, and then it opens up and you see it's a whole new scene, and then you keep pulling back, and then these two squaring off minis are scene number 3. So it's a lot of depth and context that kind of going through knowing camera movement and film and cinematography. Both of us do, so that really helped. But this shot was definitely this interplay of the scene and the lighting and kind of the context of how all of these things kind of interplayed. So the finished result took us like 5 hours, 3 people, 9 lights, but
for
8
like
seconds
8 seconds of footage.
Seconds of footage. Worth it.
Yep.
It was actually like a 20-second pull, but I'll do a little bit of speed ramping and get it to fit that 8-second mark. So this was a fun one. I know this episode's hopefully this works in audio form. Hopefully you guys still find this entertaining and enjoyable. We're doing our best to describe it. Just go see it if you can. We'll put a link in the podcast description to the YouTube video, so you can just listen to the intro again and see the clip if you want to kind of see what the heck we're talking about. But any kind of closing thoughts or interesting things or tips or I don't know, anything that comes to mind?
Closing thoughts. I would say that so the probe lens is so cool from the perspective that it gives you. Like, the fact that we can talk about this, lighting this scene as if we were 3 inches tall, like, that is the tool that it gives you, which I know sounds weird probably to say out loud. Like, get this tool that gives you the perspective of being 2 to 3 inches tall,
or don't get this tool so that we will be super special and amaze you every time we post a shot.
But I guess what I want to say is, like, how cool it is that such a thing exists, and that exists within the photo video sphere. Like, that shooting that for real is an incredibly fun and unique experience, and it's just another one of those things that makes me continue to enjoy photo and video work so much. Is, this isn't CGI. This isn't like let's go and let's model all this and do a virtual camera. Like, let's do this for real. Let's use real lights, real figures, real camera.
Yeah.
And being able to do that is so cool. So yeah, maybe don't buy a probe lens and compete with this probe lens work that we're doing. But in the same breath, boy, if you want something like that, or if something like that inspires you, not sponsored, but go buy a Laowa Probe
So that lens is not cheap.
It is not.
Depending on where you are, it's anywhere between like $1,300 to $1,500.
You need to really want it.
You do really need to want it, but it's not a super unattainable Hollywood level of expensive.
No.
Like, it is a thing you could save up for and actually have. It's not a pipe dream. And I just think that's kind of amazing that this tool is accessible at our level.
Yeah. Like, there's no other way to get this. Like,
no.
For $1,500, you're getting a viewpoint that literally does not exist in any
without
other
CGI.
Without CGI, which is just amazing to me. So props to Laowa. I mean, if I had just $30,000, I think I would spend it all on Laowa. They make way more than just the probe lens, but the probe lens is like the highlight of weird,
this is the one that we like talking about.
That they do.
So hopefully this journey about kind of how we set up a thing behind the scenes, our thinking, the problem solving. There was a lot of problem solving. I mean, of those 5 hours, probably a good hour and a half of it was trying to get like shims to be able to get things at the perfect height so that and then once we got the Mini at the perfect height, you pull back the camera a little farther, and now we got to cover up the shim with another piece of terrain or another Mini or something. And no, there was a lot of work and problem solving that went into this, but I think the exploration of kind of how we made that, hopefully it's helpful to you.
Mm-hmm.
We had a great time doing it.
Yep.
So
yeah, check it out. Check out other probe stuff as well, and gain the superpower of telling every shot that was made with a probe lens.
So for this week's video, please leave a comment on your podcast platform of choice, or Apple Podcasts, or the YouTube video. Leave a comment. Let us know what crazy thing you would love to see from a probe lens perspective.
Yeah, maybe we can make that happen.
So thank you so much for listening. We do hope you found this useful. Just a reminder, you can join us on Patreon. There's not a lot right there, but if you found this useful, entertaining, educational, $1 just helps keep the mics on, and we will bring your ears some more joy next week with a new podcast. If you have questions or ideas for future episodes, you can email us at hello@photo-op.show.
Watch us on Ben's YouTube channel at NomCreative.
As in Om Nom Nom.
Share this with a friend, and you can listen to Photo Op anywhere podcasts are sold.
Or download it. 'Cause it's free.